Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Dana Ollendyke, and I'm the project manager for the Penn State Extension Energy Team, and also a member of the TOPCORP training team. I'm joined by my colleague, Joe Conklin, an energy educator here at Penn State, who will be helping me co-host. We are very grateful to have the CTO of Renewable Energy, Stefan Streckfus, here with us today to speak about gravity energy storage. This webinar is hosted by TOPCORP, which is a consortium of universities that deliver oil and gas regulator training. Our consortium includes Penn State Extension, the Colorado School of Mines, and the University of Texas at Austin. TOPCORP's mission is to train regulatory oil and gas field inspectors and policymaking personnel, as well as provide technical knowledge, growth in professional networks, and an increase in participants' confidence. We train regulators in the US and Canada, and we continue to expand our curriculum to include offshore aspects of oil and gas operations. Here you will see a listing of all of the groups and businesses that help support TOPCORP. Thank you so much for your support, and we couldn't do this without you. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention some housekeeping items. Use the chat pod to introduce yourself and the Q&A pod to ask questions during the webinar. If there is a time after the presentation, Joe will ask those questions of our presenter. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email in about 3 business days with a link to the recording. You can also visit the Top Energy Training website for past webinar information. Lastly, if you have any problems during the webinar, please email me at djm428@psu.edu. Now let's get started. Thank you again to Stefan for joining us today to discuss gravity energy storage. Stefan Streckfus is the CTO of Renewable Energy. His career has focused on the development and deployment of new technologies in commercial settings. Prior to Renewal, Stefan was Senior Manager of Equipment Innovation at RBI for 5 years, where he focused on equipment innovation, commercialization, and deployment. In 2015, he received his first patent for modification to the broiler. Stefan earned his MS in Civil and Environmental Engineering from Stanford University and his BS in Mechanical Engineering from Duke University. Stefan, please take it away.
Right on. Thanks, Dana. Appreciate the introduction. And hello, everyone. Glad to have this chance to chat with you guys a little bit. Hopefully today I'm able to illuminate some ideas that might not be... Please screen share. That might be a bit on the novel side. Let me just get this screen share going. Hopefully everyone can see the presentation with not a lot of gray boxes. I think this is the one I've got to move. Whoop. Maybe it won't let me do that. How's that looking, Dana? Gray boxes are gone?
It is not shared yet.
Oh, it is not. Tells me I'm screen sharing. Let me give it another roll.
Yeah, I could see it.
Oh, really?
Oh. Okay, there.
Yep. Okay, sweet. All right. So today, this presentation is going to have 3 rough parts. The first part is a bit of my perspective on well repurposement, why I think it's so important, some of the value it can bring. Next, I'm going to dip a little bit into why we at Renewal think that energy storage is a fantastic repurposement pathway. And then last but not least, a few notes on what we've learned on the regulatory side when it comes down to repurposement and what's really important on that front. Without further ado, I'm Stefan Streckfus. Company is called Renewal, and we create oil wells that end well. As that implies, repurposement is central to our vision as a company. There we go. Really our mission is to renew the world's energy infrastructure by converting oil and gas's largest liability into our grid's greatest asset. We've got quite a few ideas on how to do that. I'm going to talk to you guys about one of those today. But before I get into that, first, a little bit of context here, which you guys probably know better than probably anybody. The reason that we founded this company is largely because there's such an incredible number of idle and orphan wells in North America. And when you combine that cost, I don't want us to get lost on the details here because this is a number presented by Carbon Tracker. There's definitely people that believe and disagree all over the spectrum in terms of how they calculate that number. But the point here is that no matter what, it is a very large cost to clean up all of these wells. And why do we think this is such a pressing matter now? Again, something more more prescient to you guys than almost anyone. California, I'll use it as an example, which well aware that it's a bit of an outlier as a state, but as a state, they've got about half idle wells, half inactive wells. They also have the highest P&A costs in the contingent United States. And the estimated cleanup cost, again by Carbon Tracker, about 13 billion. In-state oil and gas projected profits, about 6 billion. I don't rest a lot on the specifics of these numbers or that differential. Really, the high level message here is what I think is important, which is the fact that these two numbers could end up quite close, that estimated cleanup costs could exceed oil and gas profits at some point in time, means that there is a reasonably expectable world in which the taxpayers have to pay to clean up a mess that is currently existing today. And that's something that none of us want to have happen. And I think that's why it's such a big responsibility for us to all figure out a way to, yeah, to avoid that scenario or at least mitigate the impacts of it. And thus comes repurposing. And repurposing, I think, is a critical solution in this because it is a market-based solution. It is a pathway that doesn't just put a massive burden on the current owners that perhaps in that California example, if those numbers are accurate from Carbon Tracker, that the oil and gas company literally doesn't have the ability to hold up. It instead adds new value to the local energy system. And by doing that, it reduces the risk of these wells becoming an orphan. And along in that process, also maintains a central role for operators and workforce in this evolving energy system. And we'll get into a little bit more of that in the future. But I think a key point here is that for it to be a truly market-based solution, it has to make financial sense to the operator. And that's what we spend a lot of time trying to figure out here at Renewal. Notably, this is something that is much more likely in states with pressure to decommission inactive or idle wells. And we can touch on that a bit more later. Oh yeah, sorry. One last point I wanted to deliver here is that one really interesting point within the decision to repurpose rather than remove is the fact that in most of these cases, especially in the gravity well case, which is what I'll be talking about today, you're able to preserve the optionality of the well. And that means it could be used for any value production methodology that has come up with in the future for that wellbore, that piece of infrastructure. In the bottom of the slide, I've listed out a few different ways that wells can be repurposed. There's definitely more than this. These are just the closest to commercial options I know of. But today, that last note, gravity wells, that's what we build at Renewal, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on today. So what a gravity well is, relatively simple. This is how the conversion occurs. This is an example where there's a pump jack on site. We would first remove the pump jack, take out the production production tubing, and then we seal the well. If you notice that big gray plug down there, seal the well according to whatever regulation makes most sense. And then we install our weight, which is this long green cylinder within the well. And after that, we move the pump jack away, we move the workover rig away and install our gravity storage system, which now notably is far smaller than this. We just redid our design so that it's now only about 17 feet long. And once that is complete, we're then able to move the weight up to charge the system, then lower the weight down. It turns a generator on surface to put electricity back on the grid whenever it's most valuable. So like a good way to think about this at a very high level is if you're in a location where solar is really prevalent, sun goes down, people still want to use electricity. if you used some of the solar to raise some of these weights, then whenever the sun goes down, you're able to lower the weights, continuing to produce power on the grid from that solar after the sun has gone down. Now, that's a hyper-specific example. We definitely don't need solar to make sense. We don't need renewable energy for this, for energy storage to be relevant. In fact, I get into this a little bit more later in this presentation, but gravity energy storage first installation was back in the 1920s, still operating today, still profitable through all the changes in the energy system along the way. But focusing back on this solution, so I mentioned the process of how we convert it. Notably, once it's plugged, this allows us to, we've sealed off the reservoir, and we always plug above the shallowest perforations to make sure that we've isolated. After that, we've got a couple of different ways that we monitor the well in order to ensure that that containment is maintained. And it creates this new setting where totally novel level of transparency and visibility is achieved, because we're going to have these monitors running 24/7. We do a ton of physics modeling in the background to make sure that we would never rub a hole in the casing, that we would never cause any meaningful damage to the well. However, in the situation where it does occur, we will know within minutes, and we'll have the ability to then trigger remediative efforts immediately thereafter, which is, we think, a serious advantage to this over traditional plug and abandonment, which no doubt works phenomenally on a 10 to 20 to maybe 30-year time scale. But eventually, as we attempt to leave these wells for eternity, timescales of cement become relevant to question. All right, and so if that's how we do what we do, a sort of a high-level overview of what this pathway looks like as compared to the current pathway. BAU stands for business as usual. Last time I presented this, I was informed that that's not as common of a acronym as I thought. Apologies there, I meant to correct that. But if business as usual is you've got the well in production, obviously not always a pump jack, but it's in some sort of production, then you do 100% cost remediation, then you end up with a brownfield, probably greenfield at best. The new path forward that we present is, instead of doing that 100% cost remediation, the well owner pays about 75% of what they normally would pay. That also goes into a separate fee paid to us. Don't want to get lost in the business model. I don't think it's that as important to this conversation as the high level of what this technology and other repurposement can do. But after that occurs, we're currently installing the minimum amount of energy storage that makes economic sense into the well. And that creates this situation where really it is maximum optionality on that well moving forward, where depending on what we're required to do, there's at the very minimum a cast iron bridge plug at the bottom of that well, and perhaps some cement on top. And in that case, if there's another way to pull value out of this well, or depending on how the energy ecosystem evolves, you can change it quite easily in the future. And so you could return to production, you could turn it into a mineral extraction well, which I'm going to perhaps bore you guys with a little bit of detail on, but I think it's really cool after this. Or can also maximize the amount of energy storage in that well if it happens that the future of that particular location is very high value for energy storage. I mentioned before the idea that the first gravity storage installation is still out there making money today, 100 years later. And I think that really adds a bit of perspective on how we see the repurposement of these wells, is that we've got the ability to maintain relevancy for this asset almost indefinitely. And also worth noting that I talked about those 6 different repurposement pathways. None of those existed 50 years ago. And so as we go to look at these assets, what I like to encourage is a change in perspective towards a perspective that really puts a lot more weight on optionality. and the way that these could be used as we continue to discover new methods for repurposement. All right, so this is digging a little bit into critical minerals. Apologies if this isn't interesting to you guys. I think it's super cool. And one of the reason why is because it's so unpredictable. So these questions, what minerals will we need in 5 years, in 10 years, in 50 years? I would love if anybody could give me a good answer to any of these. I think that we could all go out and make billions of dollars if we can put a good answer on any of these three questions. And I think lithium is a fantastic example of this is a per year production of lithium, and you'll see that it has ballooned over the last 8 years. And that is something that I would challenge anybody to have predicted that explosion 10 years before, 15 years before. And this is not the only mineral that's like this. Notably, I also just like to call it out on this graph. There's no United States. It's because we produce almost none of it. Interestingly, when we look at wells across the United States, look at the produced water that's coming out, you've got an incredible amount of significantly concentrated critical minerals. Now, this is almost every region of oil and gas production is listed here, and you'll note that it's not just one mineral. You got lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, barium, and magnesium. And this is just what conveniently fits into this map. There's also precious metals as well that come out of these wells. And I was just at ARPI's summit a couple of weeks ago. A handful of really cool companies that have come up with ways at increasingly lower costs to extract these minerals out and bring them into concentrations that are usable. I think there's a lot of promise in this field out into the future. And this is, again, just one pathway of repurposement. All right, so that sort of concludes me harping on why I think repurposement is a really interesting pathway forward for these wells, is now transitioning over to why we think energy storage is a great option. So much like the number for the cost to clean up every single well across the United States, I think that when things are summarized at this level, getting to the specifics of $430 billion doesn't make a ton of sense, but regardless, it is without a doubt that this number is massive and probably comparable to the cost to clean up the wells across the United States. Now, why? Why did people think it's going to be such a massive market? Well, the core role of energy storage is, as my co-founder likes to say, actually, some of you guys have probably met him before, Kemp Gregory. What energy storage does is it takes Mother Nature's supply curve. And so in this particular instance, we're referencing wind and solar, and then it matches it to civilization's demand curve. So it allows flexibility on the electricity system that is absolutely necessary because, and this is a fact that, at least for me, blew my mind when I first learned it, the electricity system is a perfectly balanced system. Whenever you're turning on a light, there's a generator somewhere producing more electricity. There's no like, there's no you produce it now and then 5 minutes later, you can turn on a light and it'll just turn on. It has to be perfectly balanced at all times. And so energy storage allows you to have some flexibility to charge and discharge according to whatever the consumers need in that moment. It creates resiliency. And so within energy storage, there's a category of energy storage called gravity energy storage, which is what we build. And its core, quite simple, mass times gravity times height. You're really just making potential energy, converting electricity to potential energy by lifting some sort of mass, creating a height differential. Notably, this is also not a new type of energy storage. It is by far the most prevalent energy storage on the grid. With that said, lithium ion has started to take over the last 10 years or so. And definitely and continues to be the most deployed energy storage at present, largely because of siting issues around pumped hydro storage. And with that said, so with the idea that gravity storage was dominant, lithium ion is now dominant. Notably, it is not is not necessarily expected that lithium-ion will continue its dominance. There's been a lot of growth in this sector over the last 5 to 10 years, especially the last 2 years. And I've just picked and chosen some random headlines that were relevant here, but a lot of money is flowing in on the investment side, hundreds of millions of dollars. And then in terms of the technology's development and deployment, it's also accelerating quite rapidly with one study came out with a CAGR of 13.4%. Okay, so if that's what gravity storage is at a high level, why would wells be well suited? Why are we interested in using wells? Going back to the idea that it's potential energy, that height differential is quintessential here because your average gravity storage, all other gravity storage concepts just about that I know of are either creating or accessing between 100 and 500 feet of vertical displacement. As you guys know better than most, the average well is about a mile deep. And so this means that every kilogram we suspend, far more valuable in a well. There's also some additional benefits here that are worth calling out really quickly. Electrical infrastructure is already on a lot of these sites. There's often existing interconnection agreements in locations where power is produced on site. The oil field expertise has been completely invaluable to our development of this technology. Truly, I think this would have been decades out if we didn't have all of the oil and gas know-how that we've stood on the top of the shoulders of giants. And then also very notable here that these are high valuable variable energy generation sites for wind and solar, and making it so that energy storage is that much more valuable when combined. But last but certainly not least, it costs a lot of money to clean up these wells, and it costs even more money to clean up these wells well. So we give an alternative pathway that decreases the cost. Now, that's why we're so excited about this idea. There are reasons why this concept has not proliferated in the past. There are challenges on this front, and this is what we've spent a lot of the last 5 years working on. And energy storage markets themselves are mandated at a FERC level, at a national level, but they're nascent and they're highly variable. So it's something that's difficult to predict, difficult to finance, but there's been a lot of work that's gone into that over the last 5 years that we're going to benefit from. Structures vary from region to region, even within states. And in states with no wholesale market, their storage purchases are done largely through RFPs, which are, again, sort of that unpredictability is what really makes that challenging. Luckily, we've done a ton of work with NREL out here in Colorado to predict these and create a firm foundation on which we can build a company. And then on the right side of this is the oil and gas side. Plug-in abandonment well data. Yeah, it is hard to come across a lot of this data because we need to figure out not only how much it costs we need to predict how much it will cost to P&A a well, but also which wells will be P&A'd at what time. And then on the P&A cost prediction side, I'm not going to go through all the details here. We spend a ton of time on this, but the truth is that some of the highest cost factors cannot be predicted. However, with that said, we can go off of averages, and that has been our workaround so far. Okay. So why are wells challenging? This is digging a little bit deeper into site selection, which we have spent a serious amount of time over the last couple of years being able to figure out how we can predict, again, which wells are going to be expensive to plug and abandon, and when will they be plug and abandoned. And well owners are not always excited to share data on these fronts, probably for good reason. But we've found a way to take any drilling survey, really any PDF with data relevant to oil and gas wells, and we're able to turn it into a query-ready database. And this is something that we offer as a service to other entities, perhaps to you guys. But it is something that has enabled us to go out and go onto, say, CalGEM or the ECMC website and automate the extraction of all of those documents and turn them into something that can then be studied at large because we've aggregated all the data into one place. Yeah. All right. So transitioning from there into what makes a well suitable, this is part of what we're looking for when we go through all these databases. And there are 9 suitability required for a gravity well, but the most important are first depth and casing size, which we give an example here of 3,000 feet, 5.5-inch casing. Notably, it's really a volume question. So it's we could put up the entire relevant table here, but just for succinctness, yeah, if the well is deeper, then you can go smaller in casing. If the well is shallower, then you need the casing to be larger. And then we need a power connection somewhere nearby. There are exceptions to this. If we had a site where there's something like 4 or 5 wells that are suitable for conversion, then it pretty quickly starts to make sense that we just run the power lines out there. But in general, the economics will always be better if it's already there and we don't have to pay for it. This is a repurposement mission after all. And then again, this standard isn't perfect. Really, the best for us is that we get a wellbore survey so we can run our diagnostics on it. But in general, the lines we tend to draw are inclination at greater than 10 degrees is too much. Dogleg severity greater than 5 degrees is too much. The caveat here is that if it was just a brief portion of the well that has an inclination of 10 degrees, we could probably work with it. There's just a brief portion of the well that's above 5 degrees dogleg. Well, I know we can work with it because our current prototype is installed on a well just like that. Um, but yeah, these are standards that allow us to explain it a little bit more easily. All right, and impact potential. So like why would we be interested in doing this at all? It's not just about money. There's also an environmental opportunity here. So because we cut out the cost, some of the cost of cleaning up these wells, we enable more wells to be cleaned up. And with that, something like 1.2 million more wells can be plugged by 2050. And that comes out to about 1/3 of a gigaton of CO2 per year that's mitigated in the form of methane emissions. And then on the energy storage deployment, we're talking about 1/10 of the United States need, we believe exists within these wells, or doesn't exist today, but we could deploy it within the wells in the United States. All right, so we've now gone through well repurposement as a topic, why I'm so passionate about it. We've transitioned from there into why I believe energy storage is a phenomenal fit for that repurposement need. And last but certainly not least, coming into the regulatory side. And here I will admit ahead of time, apologies, I am not the team's policy expert. Unfortunately, she was not available today. She's quite sick, but I'm going to cover a bit of what we've seen, but a bit of what is working, and a bit about the challenges that we see in this realm. So, regulatory challenges at a high level. Repurposing is a relatively novel idea. There's not the regulations that exist. Usually, the thought of repurposement was not contemplated when writing them. And last but not least, there is no incentive for operators to convert if they can't defer the plug-in abandonment. So our progress to date is that we've done a ton of analysis across quite a few different states. We've got a pathway identified in Colorado, which I'm going to talk in some detail on. Actually, just 2 weeks ago, last week, within the last couple of weeks, we created a pathway in New Mexico, just awaiting the governor's signature. And we are running legislation in California for the second time with some sort of interesting learnings along the way there. Now, what we think are needed on the regulatory side are clear and comprehensive definitions of well repurposing. We have to, of course, we don't want to open up doors or loopholes that allow for people to not plug and abandon wells that need to be plugged and abandoned, or for situations where people are avoiding plug and abandonment in order to do something that is not actually valuable to the to the local populace. And then we also believe it's necessary to have conversion counting towards plug and abandonment requirements. And that is largely to create an economic incentive for that action. Next, ensuring environmental protection. I think we're all on the same page there, that our goal here is to make sure that there's something that prevents any continued pollution or contamination that comes from these wells. And then finally, the final decommission obligations must be considered in the writing of the statute to ensure that a situation with more liability associated with well remediation than potential revenue coming from these assets is not created. All right, and I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on the examples, largely because I'm worried that I'm going to speak about something that I do not fully understand, as I'm the technical lead on our team. As I mentioned before, I'm not the regulatory expert, but so I'm phoned in here from Colorado. So here in Colorado, there is a beneficial use clause that is workable for repurposing, which basically makes it so that the director of the UCMC has the ability to approve a particular reuse of the well as beneficial use, allowing it to remove a well from the plug and abandonment, required plug and abandonment list. And so that allows a concept like ours to go out and be a viable alternative. And California, oh, that's strange. Huh. Sorry about that. Yeah, my update to this slide, I guess I failed to save it. But so last year we ran SB 1433. This year we're running California SB 567. The two are phrased extremely similarly. This is a story of what happened last year, where we actually passed unanimously through every part of the Senate and through the Assembly Natural Resources Committee. And then we got stopped on Assembly appropriations, largely because, yeah, it really came down to us having put too many wells in the pilot program, and the state was in a major deficit year. And yeah, they thought that they needed to hire 75 employees to regulate our industry that exists as a company of 7 people. But that's something that there was on our side a mistake made. We should not have put that many wells in the pilot program. This year we're coming back around with far less wells in what we believe is much better suited to success. And from there, just wanted to toss out a note here where the team, the 7 I just referenced. We got our CEO, Kim Gregory, who I suspect a few of you guys have met. And then we've got a team all the way from public policy over to data science, quite a few engineers, as we've been largely focused on technology development to date. And then a variety of advisors that we're really, really fortunate to have on board with us. And also just wanted to add a little bit of context as to what we've been working on over the last 5 years. We've been quickly iterating on the prototyping front. Founded in 2020, built our first prototype in 2021, deployed that system in Texas and then California in 2022 and 2023. Learned a lot about the electricity regulatory world in that California deployment. Turns out it's a lot harder to deploy in California than it is in Texas. So I'm sure most of you guys are not surprised by. But after that, we built our first full-scale commercial device last year, and we've got that up and operating today. Oh, sorry, did not mean to jump all the way. And yeah, that's really us shifting an order of magnitude in terms of the amount of weight and power and energy that we're able to put out with that well. Notably, our individual systems, I mentioned that we're building a relative minimum for gravity storage to be economically viable. So really, when we look at repurposing these wells, it is much more about repurposing a group of wells than it is an individual site. 36 kilowatt hours is not a massive amount of energy storage, but when you start to multiply that by 10 or by 20, by 30, depending on what's available in that region, it adds up quite quickly. And as I mentioned before, it can become a very serious portion of the United States energy storage. All right, and so this is just touching again the general idea of what we're proposing as a reminder. Instead of doing this on your left, the traditional plug and abandonment process, we're taking out a few of the steps that do not seal the well, that are not creating that containment that we believe is the most essential part of the process. We replace it with a monitoring solution, and then also charge an activation fee in the process that allows us to install extremely low cost energy storage while still creating cost savings for the well owner. And yeah, I'm actually closing a little bit earlier than I'd intended here, but plenty of time for questions. And with that, really our vision at a high level is that we want to create a scenario where rather than spending hundreds of billions of dollars to tear out this infrastructure, we want to take those funds and use them to create a massive resource for our evolving energy needs. Again, we're Renewable Energy. I'm Stefan Streckfus. Happy to answer any questions you have here. Also, feel free to jot down my email if there are questions that we don't get to today, or if you'd just like to be in touch in general. Thanks, Al.
All right, thank you, Stefan. We have a few questions in here. I'm sure more will start to pile in, and then we won't be able to get to them, right? But because they start to come fast and furious as we get started. So, hey, I'm gonna toss you an easy one first. We have somebody who has some acronym questions, which
Oh boy.
you decide you gave us what BAU was, right? Business as usual. And I guess for those of us maybe not in this world or nonprofit world, could you let us know what RFP stands for?
Oh yes, of course. Request for proposal. So the process there, and this is a process across engineering and a few other fields as well, but it tends to be if you want a project done, especially if it's a pretty open-ended project or new technology developed, you'll first put out an RFP, a request for a proposal, and that comes back with a variety of different solution types. And then often you'll send out a second request that's a RFQ, request for quote, that then hones in on exactly what you're wanting to see as your solution, as well as very specific pricing that goes with it.
All right, and I'm gonna throw you out one last easy acronym, especially for this group. P&A.
Okay. Oh yeah, plug and abandonment, the remediation of wells.
All right, thank you. That for some we depending on the stakeholders on this webinar, they could either be new to the concept or well seasoned. So just want to make sure we're clear on that. So so we are, Penn State University and through TOPCORP, but I just looked at the attendance here and half are from Pennsylvania. So I know you're probably not familiar with Pennsylvania, but I grew up in McKean County and I grew up sled riding and playing on top of these things, which probably wasn't the wisest decision. So I saw your number, of 2.5 million orphan abandoned wells, which I know here in Pennsylvania, we project that actually to be, just in the state alone, you see anything from tens of thousands to estimates of 700,000 that
Yep.
aren't documented. So this is an important topic here, not only in Pennsylvania, but across the country. Could you give me a little insight on what your group might believe the current administration's appetite or acceptance of this practice might be for energy storage? I saw you had a couple DOE slides in there, realizing we're like 68 days into this, but
Yeah.
do you have a barometer on that or no?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and one that I wish I knew the answer even better than the thoughts I have today. But I've had the privilege of listening to Secretary Wright speak a few times. He's a Coloradan, and so I've actually seen him speak at the COGA at Colorado's Oil and Gas Association Summit here a couple of times. And in general, I know that there's a few topics he's very passionate about. One of them is resiliency of the electricity system. And so with that in mind, I think that combining the fact that in general, this is a solution that helps oil and gas well owners. It also helps whatever energy system happens to exist in the future and definitely adds resiliency in all scenarios. I think it's very well suited to his objectives. I also just want to toss out in general, unfortunately, I'm not our team's expert on Pennsylvania. That would be my co-founder. But Pennsylvania is one of our 5 states that we are focused on right now for good reason. And this is the piece that I really wish I knew, but there's a specific subset of wells that are extremely expensive to clean up, that also happen to be well suited to our technology, that I know that he is focused on trying to find well owners that own that type of well. Unfortunately, I don't know exactly what that well type is. Yeah, and you mentioned the quantity of wells. I thought it was pretty entertaining on my side just to watch when the funding within the IRA was announced. The amount of orphan wells that suddenly appeared in every state's inventory was pretty incredible. But I think it's a very real problem and also a need that definitely has to be addressed. And I think Pennsylvania's are particularly have a particularly poignant need because so many of them are so old. And so there's a lot of questionable casing structures out there, by my understanding.
So you're in luck as well because the second highest number of attendees are from Colorado. So
Ah,
what you had
nice.
mentioned, but so another question, it appears as though this technology to some degree is like you mentioned a century old, but it's not necessarily widespread. So one of the questions was on that century old project there, if you knew whether or not where did the exact question go? Has there been a casing failure or remediation over time?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I think that I didn't do the best job of explaining what I was saying there. So in terms of gravity storage in oil and gas wells, this is brand new. We're the first people to do it. We're the first people to build a prototype. Um, there's only the one well existing today that is converted over. We've converted 2 others in the past, but that was with our early minimum viable product. The project I was referring to is pumped hydro storage. And so it's a different form of gravity storage. Yeah, and as far as the maintenance costs and details of what has had to be replaced when, I don't have that. I'm not privy to it, but yeah, but I could definitely send out the name of that storage installation if anyone wanted to look it up.
Yeah. So, and I think you did answer there's two questions in one and the next one, and you did, I believe, hit it up at the end. How many kilowatts in average for one of these a mile deep well as you mentioned, and I think you did mention the answer to the next question, almost the same sentence, but how many wells would you be looking for in a typical field?
Yeah, yeah. So on that slide, it calls out the fact that what we just built was 36 kilowatts, 36 kilowatt hours. The next design we have is 40 kilowatts, 40 kilowatt hours. And I do want to make a little call out here that was sort of referenced or danced around in a couple of slides, but that size of energy storage it is not the most energy storage we could put in a well. We could put in far more. This is really us trying to create the lowest cost, most economic energy storage installation so that it makes sense on as many wells as possible. Notably that, yeah, if you get in some of the deeper wells, we're talking about megawatt hours. So you could put quite a bit, and we do think that there's situations where that will be appropriate and that will be the best economic decision. But as we're picking this technology up off the ground, this is the path that we think makes most sense for now. And forgive me, I think I forgot your second question there.
It was how many in the field?
Oh, how many in a field? Yeah,
Yeah.
so really, it is designed to make sense on a single well. And we think that that is the case. It becomes this pretty complex, but I think really interesting balancing act between what is we called, I mentioned it briefly, I'm not sure if I titled it, but activation fee is what we charge the well owner in order to convert the well. Becomes this balancing act between in a particular location, how much can we charge on an activation fee? What is that energy storage market looking like? Combined with what are our installation costs at that level of development. And so it really varies massively. But in general, what the project size we think is going to make most sense in the short term is really 3 to 5 wells. That tends to get us over the minimum to be. So I mentioned that there's a federal regulation that mandates energy storage participation in markets, and that the cutoff there is 100 kilowatt hours. So that gets us above that cutoff. It also makes it so that we've got the ability to pick and choose the absolute best sites because we're not limited to only the places that have 20 wells that make sense. But yeah, it's really variable because could be places where we got 20 wells that can share a few common pieces of equipment that completely tilt the economics in our favor.
That's interesting. You mentioned the storage regulations. I know here in this part of the country with PJM, we're having issues. We won't get into those, but part of the issue is the capacity market, and as we take coal offline and try to push for more renewables, that capacity factor really isn't there unless you have added storage. So yeah, this is an interesting pairing as opposed to lithium batteries, which, as you mentioned, with the extraction of critical minerals is a shortage, right? So, all right. So before I get professing on randomness here, let me get back to these questions. All right, we do have questions on did I understand correctly that this is only economically viable if a well is on a list requiring to be plugged? And I have another question related to that, but is our capped wells, could those be used as well?
Yeah, so I'll hit those in reverse order. Capped wells, theoretically, yes. But I would say it's really not supporting the mission of our company, so we're not targeting them at this time. We've yet to see a case where that's economically preferred. There's so many uncapped wells that right now we're targeting the inactives. With that said, there may be scenarios that I haven't seen yet. There's a lot of different wells out there. And then touching into, is this only economically viable if the well is on a plug and abandonment list today? Yes. In the near future, we think that we're probably 4 to 5 years out from it being viable on wells where that's not the case. We would need a strong energy storage market for that to be the case. And yeah, Texas for us is sort of the holy grail of scale, and we do think that that's a location where this could be viable in the relatively near future. But today, as we're building our first devices and we have pretty high development costs, yeah, we're still in a phase where what we call our activation fee is a necessary part of our economics.
Yeah, I mean, we just saw you started up, what, 2020 there, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So, all right, let's see here. They're starting to come in, and now I'm starting to get overwhelmed. But hold on. All right, hey, here's an easy one. Yes, the recording will be made available, and it will be sent to you in 3 to 5 business days. That was an easy one here. I was able to help you out there. All right. Here's one. Just a general explanation. Could you give us a general explanation? I think you did this at the beginning of how does the system work?
Totally. Yeah, I think if it's okay for me to steal the screen back, I'm gonna
Yeah.
return to those slides because I think they're pretty illustrative on that front. Oops. That is, where'd you go? All right. So just gonna flip through the conversion process. So once our device is installed, we would be, so right now the weight is at the top of the well in this image, and that is the charged state for this particular system. And basically whenever you want electricity on the grid, so whenever electricity prices are the highest is the easiest way to think of it, even though there's quite a few other reasons, you would discharge, you'd then lower the weight within the well, and that's connected via wire rope onto this winch that's up on the surface. And so when you're lowering that weight, it's turning that winch, which turns a generator, putting power onto the grid. Whenever the time comes, oh, I can't reverse that animation, but whenever the time comes where electricity prices are low, usually that's because some variable energy sources are online, or it may just be yeah, there's a wide variety of reasons why. That's the most common one today. Then we would use that low-cost electricity to raise the weight, storing the electricity as potential energy and holding that until a time when it's more valuable. Hopefully
Okay. And yeah, no, that does that. And you did, I was just reiterating the question, but yeah, so there are some questions in here, which I think you did just answer here. How does the weight get returned in order to reset the energy storage? And essentially
Yeah, and probably just a quick note on energy storage in general, because this is a pretty common tripping point. generation and energy storage are two different things. And forgive me for those of you that this is really obvious, but it's not obvious to everyone. Generation is where you're producing the electricity, you're pulling the electrons out, if you will. And energy storage, on the other hand, is something where you're not generating new electricity. You're just taking the electricity that was produced and holding it until a time when it's needed. And so every energy storage technology is going to output less energy than it intakes. So your job as an energy storage resource is to make sure that you're taking in energy when it's particularly low cost and outputting it when it's particularly high value. And that differential has to exceed the inefficiency of the system.
All right. So this sort of leads into that with what are the cycle losses? Do you have
Yeah.
a
Yes,
that?
there's a lot of work we're doing on that front. And I'd say round trip efficiency right now hovers around 70%. We think the technology will probably max out around 80 to 85.
Okay. Yeah, there's a few questions in there on that. And I think you have yeah, here's an easy one. Do you have to pay for the electricity used to raise the weight? And you just said when it's at a lower price that yeah, so
We do, although, yeah, notably, depending on where you are. So if we're in CAISO, if we're in Texas, electricity prices are negative pretty frequently, especially out where all the wells are, because of all the wind production and the fact that they have a deregulated electricity market. So there's definitely scenarios where, and yeah, not just that, there's also, I don't want to get deep into the minutia of energy storage markets, but there's situations where we get paid to consume energy in order to better balance the grid. But usually we'd be paying, and that's something built into all of our financial models.
okay. Oh, here's an interesting this. I think this is a pie and not a pie in the sky, but abandoned mines. Could your weight management be used in the vertical shafts in a mine?
So I would say our system, no. Like what we've built today, no. There's a company called Gravitricity out in the UK, and then there's another, I forget their name. I want to say it's like Gravity Power, something sort of uh yeah, sort of self-explanatory out in Australia. It's also commercializing a mine repurposement technology. We joined in on a uh, small consortium of teams. Actually, Penn State, I think, was part of this, now that I think about it. But that was applying for some funding to look at ways we could repurpose mines in Appalachia. So we're interested in it. We think that there's definitely some potential there, but wells are complicated. Mines are much more complicated, also much larger. So trade-offs.
Yeah, I mean, Penn State is ginormous, right? I know we did get an inquiry about mines yesterday, and we have to follow up on that. But yeah, I mean, it could have been any host of organizations within the university, right? So, yeah, that's interesting. All right, let's see here. Here's a rather large question that I'm not going to read because it's long. But part of the question is thermal runaway a concern with these?
Uh, I'd say not yet. I, there's definitely situations we need to prepare for when deploying our equipment into wells with large underground temperature gradients. So far, that's not been any of the sites we're targeting, but those are more preparations on the equipment selection. In terms of temperature runaway, what that makes me think of, and I'm not sure if this is addressing the intent of the question, but what it makes me think of is a scenario where we've got equipment that's overheating, and those cases are very easy to avoid for us because we're actually only operating our devices something like 2 hours a day, maximum of probably 6 hours a day. And so that's most of the equipment we use is industrial grade, so it's built to run 24/7, and we're actually using it in sort of the softest life it could hope for.
Okay. All right. So, you know what? I'm gonna do about two more of these, and then we can take you off the hot block here. So, here's a general question. Does the entire well bore need to be cased for the system to function properly?
As of today, yes, we have workarounds in mind for those wells in the future, but sort of the privilege of the pain of there being 2.6 million wells is we get to solve the easier problems first. So we're focused on cased well bores for now.
All right, and then I'm going to go with the final question here, and this is not necessarily Pennsylvania related, but it is in the context. It's Pennsylvania has been awarding $70,000 grants for abandoning gas wells greater than 3,000 feet. If allowed, would this be sufficient to convert to gravity storage well? So we're talking 70 grand, 30.
Yeah, I would say that that's sort of getting into this idea of timing for the technology. Today, I would say that would not be a well that we're targeting. Right now, we're hunting wells that are in the 200 to $400,000 range to clean up, and there happen to be plenty of those. So it's with that said, as we come down our cost curves, we think 70,000 is probably similar to the Texas range, where it's in the next 3 to 4, maybe 5 years. But we do think this technology is relevant. It's just not our first deployment sites.
All right. Well, I think yeah, you did number one a great job on the presentation, and number two, you took the darts I was throwing very well. And I hope I interpreted most of these questions properly, but we all know how that goes sometimes. So once again, thank you, Stefan and Renewal. Again, if you registered, which is every single person here, because you couldn't get in if you didn't register, you will receive a recording of this webinar in 3 to 5 days, and the presentation will be there, and hopefully, you can go through that. And I believe, Stefan, did you put your email was on one of the slides? I
Yep,
believe.
it's on there. And if you don't mind, a really quick plug.
Yeah.
Now that I know that so many Pennsylvania folk are online, Pennsylvania, super interesting state to us. We have had a difficult time working our way through the regulatory front. And I briefly showed Evan Tarrant as our director of public policy. And if any of y'all are at all interested in chatting with us, we would absolutely love the opportunity to dig further into that puzzle. And yeah, in general, please don't hesitate to reach out to me either if you have any questions.
All right. Well, you could be in luck. We don't know. There could be some people from DEP on here, so uh, perhaps. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and have a good day. Thanks again.
Thanks, Al.